The Winter War will be a nasty surprise for Stalin.
This begins with silence. Not the silence of peace, but the kind that follows after something has gone wrong.
In the bitter cold of winter, 1939, amidst the thick forests of Finland, an unexplainable horror occurred.
In the frozen forests of Finland, during a war the world forgot, an entire Soviet division vanished.
The battle is really fought in the winter. It's a kind of infantry battle.
No one ever found out why. They had tanks. They had numbers. They had orders.
Despite vastly outnumbering the Finnish defenders, the Soviets suffered heavy losses.
But what they met wasn't the Finnish army. It was something else. Radios failed. Bodies froze in impossible ways. And a low, unending hum echoed through the snow.
Is a chilling mystery that lies buried beneath the snow.
This is not a story of military defeat. It's disappearing, and maybe a warning. Let's step into the cold and see what remains. The shadow of Leningrad. In the final days of 1939, the Soviet Union launched a bold invasion of Finland. Officially, it was about national security. But behind that excuse stood the looming city of Leningrad, Stalin's pride, just 32 kilometers from the Finnish border. Any threat from the north was unacceptable. Stalin believed that crushing Finland would take weeks. He sent over 400,000 troops, waves of tanks and air power that had already rolled through Eastern Europe. Finland, with barely 4 million people, seemed defenseless. But the Soviets weren't ready for what waited in the woods. The Red Army's strategy was brute force, overwhelm, destroy, and advance. But Finland fought back with something far more potent, knowledge of their land and the will to survive. This wasn't a country defending lines on a map. It was a nation fighting in forests they had lived in for generations, snowfields that were as much their allies as their soldiers. The Soviet brass dismissed early resistance as temporary, a delay, nothing more. They expected the Finnish lines to crack like old ice, but cracks appeared instead in the Red Army itself. Morale, discipline, and reality began to shift. And in one stretch of snow-covered road, things would shift too far to ever come back. A battle against nature. From the moment the Red Army crossed into Finland, nature turned hostile, not through storms or landslides, but through silence, cold, and endless white. The Soviets came with machines, tanks, trucks, and artillery, but their engines froze. Fuel lines cracked. Steel refused to move. They had numbers, but no grip on the land beneath their boots. The Finnish soldiers knew this terrain intimately. They wore white. They traveled light. They struck at night and vanished into the trees by dawn. But even they knew the real enemy wasn't just flesh and blood. It was the land itself. Temperatures fell to -40. The snow wasn't soft. It was sharp, dry, and unforgiving. Men collapsed from frostbite. Some simply walked off into the woods, confused, and were never seen again. The Red Army's columns became clogged with broken-down vehicles. Supplies froze before they could be eaten. Guns jammed. Boots cracked. Orders from Moscow made no sense out here. Time stretched between breaths, and the forest began to feel less like a place and more like a presence. Some soldiers began to speak less. Others listened too hard. For what, they couldn't say. The war had barely begun, but something deeper had already taken hold, something no rifle could fight. The march to Suomussalmi. The 44th Rifle Division was sent to rescue the 163rd, another Soviet unit already bogged down near the village of Suomussalmi. Their mission was simple on paper: move south down Ratte Road, break through Finnish resistance, and relieve their comrades. But Ratte Road was not a normal road. It was a narrow, icy artery winding through dense pine forest, bordered by swamps and blanketed in snow that muted every sound. The Soviets advanced with confidence. Tanks rolled forward. Trucks followed with food, ammunition, and medical supplies. Artillery rumbled behind them. They believed it would be over quickly, but this belief faded with every mile. First came the silence. Radios crackled, then went dead. Units lost contact with headquarters. Entire squads would stop responding, only to turn up hours later, confused, directionless, or not at all. Then came the attacks. Not from large battalions, but from shadows in the trees. Finnish ski troops, small teams with bolt-action rifles, would fire a few deadly shots, then vanish into the forest. The Soviets fired wildly into the woods, hitting nothing. They couldn't find their attackers. They couldn't see them. As days passed, the confidence in the column began to rot, and the deeper they moved, the more the road felt like a trap, a long white corridor into something unknowable. Vanishing footsteps. The first reports were brushed off, broken equipment, frostbite, and fatigue. But something was shifting in the 44th Rifle Division. Patrols sent out into the forest didn't return. Footprints led into the trees and simply stopped. Not scattered, not dragged, just ended. Radios failed to connect, even between vehicles only meters apart. Officers barked orders that no one seemed to hear. Then came the deaths. A lieutenant was found frozen upright near his tent, mouth open as if screaming. No wounds, no blood, just ice in his eyes and a twisted look of terror frozen on his face. Another man was found lying beside a still warm truck engine, his body rigid and clean, yet somehow scorched inside. The Soviet medics had no explanation. It wasn't cold, it wasn't enemy fire. Morale crumbled. Men stopped volunteering for patrol. Some refused to sleep alone. Others whispered about strange lights in the woods, flickering blue shapes that danced above the snow. Officers tried to restore order, but they were unraveling too. The forest no longer felt like territory to be taken. It felt alive, watching, waiting. What they had taken for a military campaign was morphing into something else entirely, something that didn't follow the rules of war or reason. Whispers in the snow. The whispers began quietly, passed between soldiers over dying campfires. At first they were dismissed as fear-talking, tales to explain what couldn't be faced, but the stories kept coming. Shapes in the tree line, sounds with no source, a black blur that moved without disturbing the snow. Not men, not animals, something else. And the sound, always the sound, a low hum, constant but faint, like the vibration of an engine too deep underground to see. Some said the forest itself had changed. Trees stood too still, even without wind. Snowflakes didn't fall, they floated, as if caught in some invisible current. Others swore the shadows moved differently here, stretching longer than they should, even at noon. The men stopped speaking aloud. They didn't want whatever was out there to hear them, but still, the hum was always there, curling under their thoughts. Then came the mass silences. Entire squads, still visible just yards away, stopped moving, eyes open, guns lowered, motionless, as if time had bent around them. When officers approached, the men slowly blinked, as if waking from a deep sleep they had never entered. Orders were ignored. Maps were useless, and the feeling crept into every tent that something unnatural had taken hold. They weren't just being hunted, they were being studied. Now first, like always, be sure to hit the like button down below. It helps us out tremendously with the reach of this video. Thank you. The massacre at Ratte Road. By mid-January, the silence on Ratte Road was shattered, not by victory, but by discovery. Finnish forces, executing a final push, advanced cautiously into what had once been Soviet territory. What they found defied belief. Over 7,000 Soviet soldiers lay dead in the snow. But this wasn't a battlefield. There were no signs of organized combat, no trenches, no clear lines, just bodies, thousands of them, frozen mid-motion, like statues struck in a moment of panic. Some were curled up, eyes wide open, arms wrapped around themselves. Others had fallen mid-step, their mouths frozen in silent screams. Many showed no wounds, no blood, just horror etched into their faces. Stranger still, several corpses displayed signs of extreme internal trauma, organs blackened, scorched from within, yet their clothing remained untouched. No burns, no blast marks. The air hung heavy with an unnatural scent. Not death, not rot, but something sharp, metallic, like ozone and burnt copper. Finnish soldiers covered their mouths, choking on a smell that didn't belong on this earth. Vehicles stood abandoned, some with engines still faintly warm. The radios were silent, rifles unfired, ammunition untouched. It was as if the entire division had stopped, then collapsed, not from battle, but from something else, something invisible, something impossible. The missing. Among the wreckage, it wasn't just the dead that raised questions. It was what couldn't be found. For every body accounted for, another seemed to have vanished. Finnish scouts tracked boot prints leading away from the road, only for them to stop abruptly, not at a river, not at a cliff, just stopped. In some cases, the tracks began again deeper into the forest, as if the soldier had reappeared, only to vanish once more. Entire groups had disappeared without leaving a trace. No blood, no discarded gear, not even a snapped branch. Field medics found things they couldn't explain. One wrote that the blood in several bodies had not frozen, as it should have in sub-zero temperatures. Instead, it had crystallized into a black, glass-like substance, like obsidian, shiny, hard, cold in ways that weren't just physical. Official reports were halted. Journalists were denied access. The Finnish government said it was to prevent panic, but those on the ground knew it was something else. The higher-ups weren't just scared of what had happened. They were afraid of what it meant, that this wasn't war anymore. It was an event, a phenomenon. And the deeper they looked, the more it seemed like something had erased part of reality itself, quietly, surgically, without explanation. Redacted truth. Months later, Soviet recovery teams arrived, but under strict orders. Areas were sealed. Survivors were taken away. Their accounts were never published. Many never returned. Leaked files revealed disturbing phrases, non-biological interference, anomalous battlefield conditions. One memo read, "This was something else." Officially, losses were blamed on Finnish tactics and bad weather. Unofficially, reports described strange mental collapses. Men who'd heard the hum became unresponsive. Medics couldn't find injuries, only blank stares and shaking hands. The documents that escaped redaction painted a picture far stranger than failure. They hinted at a field of influence, not just physical, but cognitive. The radios melted, brains scrambled. Soviet leaders buried the truth, not just to save face, but to seal something they couldn't understand. This wasn't a defeat, it was exposure, contact. The 44th didn't just vanish, it was consumed, quietly, precisely, as if something had reached up from the frozen earth, tested them, and decided they were unfit to leave. Patterns in the ice. In 1972, a Finnish geologist surveying glacial layers near Rate Road uncovered a disturbing anomaly. The ice wasn't natural. It formed in clean, grid-like striations, too precise for nature. Scientific instruments failed. Radiation meters froze. Magnetic compasses spun. One final note from the lead scientist read, "The hum is still here." That hum, a low vibration heard since the Winter War, was once dismissed as myth, but now it felt unmistakably real. The ground itself seemed to tremble, faintly, but constantly. The survey team left early, rattled by their data. The patterns in the ice weren't decorative, they were signatures. Signs of control, signs of interference. Something had happened here that wasn't geological. The energy required to create such order wasn't from bombs or weather. It was focused, deliberate. No explanation was ever given. The site was marked unstable, but never revisited. The snow returned. The trees regrew, but the grid remained, hidden just beneath the frost. A frozen message in a language no one yet understood. And beneath it all, the hum, always the hum. The 2024 expedition. 85 years later, the Finnish Ministry of Culture approved a new expedition, part scientific mission, part archaeological closure. The world had changed, but whispers about Rate Road hadn't faded. This time, researchers came armed with ground-penetrating radar, satellite imaging, and electromagnetic mapping tools. They weren't chasing legends, they wanted data. What they found changed everything. Beneath the topsoil, they discovered vitrified sand, formed only by intense heat, not fire, but something far hotter and more focused. Magnetically charged rocks littered the site, their alignment unnatural. Then, near what was once a Soviet command post, they uncovered a buried metal disc, 3 feet wide, perfectly smooth, etched with Cyrillic warning symbols no one could decode. Deeper still was the final shock, a glowing fragment of fused metal, still pulsing faintly. It wasn't warm, it wasn't radioactive, but it felt aware. The instruments malfunctioned again, radiation spikes with no source, and always the hum, now stronger, vibrating through gloves and gear. The team was silenced. Non-disclosure agreements were signed. The Finnish government sealed the site, citing environmental protection. But footage leaked, showing an orb buried beneath the frost, ringed by dead vegetation and electromagnetic distortion. This wasn't a remnant of war. It was something older, something that had merely been awakened by the Soviets and might not be sleeping anymore. Something happened on Rate Road. Not just a battle, not just a tragedy, something that rewrote the rules of presence and perception. The Red Army didn't lose a division. They offered it. To what? No one knows. But the hum remains. Locals still hear it in the dead of winter. Compasses still spin each January 5th. And the forest, untouched for decades, still feels like it's watching. Whatever sleeps beneath the snow isn't finished. Maybe it never was. Maybe it never will be. If we listen too closely, we might hear it again. Or worse, we might understand what it's saying.